Welcome to the UNCG MSAT Continuing Education module on evidence-based practice. This is part 8, evidence-based practice at the knee. Please complete all 10 parts in the quiz that follows to receive your CEU. Let's begin. In the previous sections, we have talked about the basics of evidence-based practice, looked at an example in the literature on evidence-based practice, the overall model of evidence-based practice, which includes not only the evidence, but also clinician and patient preferences. In the previous section, we applied this to the ankle, looking at the Ottawa ankle rules. In this section, we are going to focus on special tests for the meniscus at the knee. One of the tests that we teach our students here at UNCG is the Fessely test. This is a somewhat new test. I don't remember actually learning this test when I went through school, and maybe many clinicians have never heard of it. The Fessely test is looking at the meniscus by having the patient in a weight-bearing stance on their pathological side, and we test them in both 5 degrees and 20 degrees of knee flexion. While they're in flexion, we have them actively/passively rotate on that pathological knee, looking for a reproduction of meniscal symptoms that we know: clicking, popping, locking, pain, etc. When you look at the evidence regarding this test, you're going to notice that this test has been compared to our more classic meniscal test. This is one instance where we actually challenge the students to think outside of traditional clinical tests that they are probably seeing in their clinical rotations. No doubt, physicians, athletic trainers, or other medical professionals are performing McMurray's and Apley's tests. These have been used for years and years and years. What we're finding out now is that even though these are quote-unquote classic tests have been used for a long time, they don't necessarily have the evidence to support their continued use. When you look at this table, you can notice that the Apley's test and the McMurray's test have very poor sensitivity values. If we remember from part 3, sensitivity, when negative, means ruling a condition out. So if you have a negative Apley's or a negative McMurray's, you are not confident that you can rule out the presence of a meniscus. Now, their specificity values are actually pretty good. They are both in the 90s and the 80s, which means that if you have a positive McMurray's or a positive Apley's, you can be fairly confident, and at least pretty confident, that they actually do have a meniscus. Now let's compare that to the Fessely test at 5 and 20 degrees. You're going to notice that with this test, that has actually both very good specificity and sensitivity values, especially at 20 degrees. What this is showing us is that this test is not only good for ruling the condition in, like Apley's and McMurray's, but it's also good at ruling the condition out. One thing we challenge the students is that if they had one and only one special test to do for meniscus, which one are you going to choose and why? We're hoping that the students using evidence would pick the Fessely test simply because the evidence is there. Now, your job as a preceptor would be to use your own clinician preference and the patient preference to open a dialogue on whether or not you wish to use the Fessely test, or maybe the McMurray's test, or the Apley's, or even joint line tenderness. We are not trying to say there's only one right way to test a meniscus. What we're trying to challenge our students to learn is that the evidence is out there, and they might want to consider using this when they develop their critical decision making. Me personally, I have used McMurray's for many, many years, and I've gotten very good results with it. So my clinician preference would still be to add a McMurray's. However, I have now also included the Fessely test into my repertoire when looking for meniscal tear because I've used it, I've gotten good results, and the evidence supports it. As we go through the other modules and the other parts, you're going to see we do this for multiple body parts.